welcome to Sphinx Radio.
Thank you very much.
Now, Randy, you've been active in the Catholic Church for many, many years, and I just want to point out to our listeners that I am a Roman Catholic, and what we'll be saying in this interview are observations we are making about a church we actually deeply love and respect. So I don't want anyone to think that this is anti-Catholic sentiment, because I repeat, we are both Roman Catholics, and we're commenting on some historical, empirical events that have occurred in the Roman Catholic Church, which are deeply disturbing to us and to people of goodwill everywhere. Now, Randy, you have a book out, a wonderful book I highly recommend, called Rite of Sodomy. That's R-I-T-E, not R-I-G-H-T.
Correct.
R-I-T-E, Rite of Sodomy. And this book is over 1,000 pages with wonderful, wonderful references. And I wrote a book called Lucifer's Lodge, Satanic Ritual Abuse in the Catholic Church. And this is a wonderful companion book which gives a lot more deep information about the problem of homosexuality, pedestry, and pedophilia within the Roman Catholic Church. Now, Randy, tell us, what urged you to write a book like this?
Well, the main reason was to give some substantial historical references to Catholics who are besieged with all types of false information and propaganda with regard to the issue of homosexuality and pederasty in the church today. It basically shows, number one, that the issue of homosexuality in the church, particularly with regard to the all-male priesthood, is not a new problem. It's an old problem, and it has been with the church because we have a hierarchical order and we have an all-male clergy. Secondly, is to try to document in more recent times, let's say over the last 100 years, the rise of homosexuality in the American hierarchy. Most of the sensational cases that you hear of today with regard to sexual abuse in the church revolves around individual priests, but the fact that we have many homosexuals in the American hierarchy is largely ignored, and yet it is because we have so many cardinals and bishops, not only in the United States but also abroad, who are homosexuals, that we have the kernel, the essence of the reason why this scandal has grown to the proportion that it has.
That's a really fascinating answer, and just to let people know, they can purchase this book, Rite of Sodomy, at riteofsodomy.com, R-I-T-E, riteofsodomy.com, and it's well worth the cover price. Again, I highly recommend it, and it is richly and deeply researched. Now, Randy, you trace sodomy back for centuries. Do you feel pre-Christian homosexual rituals seeped into the early church somehow, or does it go back that far?
Well, we know, first of all, we know that the apostles, and we know from Scripture, the writing of the early church fathers, that homosexual practices, particularly the form of sodomy that involves the seduction of minors, whether they be boys or girls, was severely condemned. And so about that, there is no question. But in the church, as we began to institutionalize formally the priesthood, and then we had the growth of religious orders and monasteries and so forth, we found that the vice of homosexuality and pederasty began to become a more ongoing problem. And people will say, well, how do you know this? Well, we know this because one of the most thorough treatise on sodomy and pederasty ever written by a churchman was written by St. Peter Damian in the year 1049.
Oh, wow. So the fact that they're condemning it and writing about it means that it was a problem. If it wasn't a problem, they probably wouldn't have mentioned it.
Oh, that's right. And this is a treatise which is absolutely phenomenal in the way that when you read it, it's as if it was written today, because all the abuses of the clergy are mentioned in there, as well as the need for reform. Now, St. Peter Damian wrote the book specifically for Pope Leo IX because it's his belief, and it is as true today as it was then, that moral reform in the church begins with the papacy. So it's very unlikely that we're going to see any true reform with regard to homosexuality, both in the male priesthood and in the female religious orders, unless we have that reform beginning at the top, and that is with the Pope.
Right. Now, what impact did homosexuality have on the medieval church? Did this continue on after St. Damien?
Yes. Wherever you had periods of famine and war and general upheaval in the web and of society, you have sexual perversion, including homosexuality, raising its head. So it's not unusual that in the medieval church we had the problem of homosexuality. Now, the thing is, though, the way it was handled, generally speaking, if a person admitted to such acts in the confessional, he was generally treated with the mercy given to any penitent, and the need, of course, to do penance, repent, reform your life,
and change. Yeah.
Yes. The only exception, however, or the main exception was, if the church was dealing with a criminal act. In other words, if the homosexual act involved rape or murder or blasphemy or the practice or occult practices, then the guilty party, if he was a clergyman, was defrocked and then turned over to the state for punishment. So the problem existed, but the church as a whole tended to be very vigilant with regard to stemming the practice, and there was no question that the church condemned homosexuality and pederasty even more so.
Now, let's say since the Reformation, roughly just 1500 onward, did this problem continue to rear its ugly head in the church?
Well, yes, mainly because it reared its ugly head in society at large, and so it could not but help impact on the church. Now, I think this is probably as good a point as any to say that when we're dealing with sodomy, as you well know, I'm not telling you anything new, but sodomy has its inherent occult meaning, which is, in effect, whether or not the person who's practicing the vice intends it to be so. Sodomy, is often called the devil's congress, in that it's an action which mocks normal conjugal love. And whereas we have the works of God are always fruitful, the work of the devil is always sterile. And so, the teachings of the Gnostics and the Cathars they're not as they're not dead. They're very active, as you know, in today's society, and so that's one of the reasons we so often find sodomy as a staple practice of the occult and of Freemasonry.
Oh, amazing! Really. Now we'll get into some real name tossing, or whatever you want to call it, name dropping. Naming names, that's the term I was looking for. Now, in Rite of Sodomy, you mentioned that some major post-World War II bishops and cardinals were homosexuals. Who were they?
Well, first let me explain that if we look at a timeline of the rise of homosexuality and pederasty in the Catholic Church, first of all, we find out that it parallels very closely the rise of the secular homosexual collective from the end of the 19th century to the present time. Now, one of the major theses in my book is that there is an intergenerational element within homosexuality within the church. And by that I mean that homosexual bishops and cardinals beget homosexual cardinals, and bishops beget homosexual cardinals and bishops. Right now we're currently in our third and fourth generation. The Rite of Sodomy documents this pattern in the American hierarchy over a 100-year period, and it zeroes in on two homosexual lineages. One is that of Cardinal Spellman of New York, and the other is that of Cardinal Bernardin of Chicago. Now, both were homosexuals, both were kingmakers, and both were responsible for the rise of numerous homosexual priests to the ranks of bishops and cardinals. And it is from this lineage that we find so many of the cases that have made the headlines today. It's not unusual to find out as one traces the ordinations and the actions of these pederast priests to the source, and many times those links will go all the way back to Bernardin and then even farther to Cardinal Spellman. So we're actually dealing with, even though both men are dead, we're dealing with the aftermath of their own individual homosexuality plus their appointment of other homosexuals to the American hierarchy.
Now, I can confirm a bit of that in my research, Randy. I did my master's degree at San Francisco State University in philosophy, and when I was out there, I was amongst the real left of the liberals, which is quite interesting. But they were all very nice to me. But a guy who typed my papers in San Francisco was a man named Bill Crick. This is I graduated in '92 before we had all these computers, and back then you had to pay someone to type your papers. Young people don't know that anymore. They grow up with these computers. But Bill Crick was this guy who typed my papers, and he was a gay activist in the Midwest when he was younger. He was one of these first gay ministers, but he told me that the gay community in Chicago was aware of Bernardin's homosexuality and even might have had photographs of him, and they used this to make sure he didn't fire any openly gay people who were working for the Archdiocese of Chicago. I just wanted to toss that in just to back up what you're saying.
Correct. And we also are fairly well acquainted, I think most people are, of Bernardin's connection to the occult, which is detailed in my book.
Well, very strange. He had a Freemasonic funeral, which few people realize. You know, it was an official funeral, and there was a Masonic contingent there. So that's
how we had the gay chorus
in the Chicago Gay Men's Chorus. They're very talented singers. I don't know if I'd want them to sing at my funeral, but you know.
Well, I think it was symbolic. It was his last thumb at the nose.
Oh yeah,
at those who oppose homosexuality in the church.
Oh yeah, I mean that was like exactly spitting